coming aboard DREDD, did you have any knowledge of the character before going in?
I had some knowledge of it. I read it as a teenager, and to me that was, I guess, one of the aspects about being involved in this project that was really rewarding, because I not only sort of reconnected with those stories I read and responded to as a teenager, but then I discovered a whole lot of new stories that had been written subsequent to my stopped reading them. And what I discovered was this real kind of wonderful depth and maturity that had evolved in Wagner's writing, and I think that was a real gift.
And Olivia, I guess you didn't really.
I had knowledge of the comics, but certainly no acquaintanceship with them until, you know, my first real introduction to the world of DREDD was reading the screenplay. And then, of course, from there, after I was lucky enough to get the job, then I kind of dived into the comics themselves.
And it was your first action movie, I guess, right? Well, kind of after The Darkest Hour,
yeah,
I guess.
It was actually right after. I was in Moscow and then home for 1 week, like 6 days, and then I went to Cape Town. It was a whirlwind.
And physically, for both of you, I suppose, it must have been a really demanding film, right? Just the fight choreography and stuff. How did you guys handle that?
It was physically demanding for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
I mean, for me personally, I spent about 14 weeks training before I even got to Cape Town, and then we had about a 2 or 3 week training session with these British military guys who taught us the tactical stuff. And then from there, really, just every day was a challenge. Just wearing that uniform, you know, the leather motorbike uniform and the body armor, and shooting a film in the middle of summer. It was a huge challenge.
In the Southern Hemisphere.
Yeah.
It was, I mean, the suit is very tight, and so there's just resistance on every movement that you make. So even something like walking up a flight of stairs, or I remember, you know, a time or two having to hold my gun up for, you know, entire takes, and you're just dead at the end. When they call cut, you just kind of drop the gun. You don't really drop the gun, but you know, it can be really exhausting just wearing the suit.
Now, I'm sure, I mean, you guys both know that there was another Judge Dredd movie, the Stallone version, but this, yeah. But to me, this is obviously...
That's what everyone keeps talking about.
Kind of recaptures, though, a bit of the satire or the attitude of the original books, and it's much more... You know, the first one was kind of a straight-ahead action film, but this one, as was saying to Alex, doesn't feel lowbrow. It feels like there's some social commentary in there. The same way that the comics was about Thatcher, England, it feels to me that DREDD is kind of about our own time, right? And was that something that drew you guys to the project?
No, not overly. For me, what drew me to the project was the characters.
Yeah.
Because what Alex had done is he had written a fun, action-packed film, but at the heart of this film, it's about the characters. It's about the relationship between Anderson and DREDD and the evolution of that relationship. And to me, you know, if you get the human element right, then that's what's going to engage an audience. And beyond that, also the humor. It's like you actually pointed out. There was a wonderful, dry sense of humor in the comics, and Alex also managed to capture that and inject that into the film.
How difficult was it not having your eyes, basically, acting without them?
It was a challenge, but I guess the interesting discovery really was just having faith that if you think the thought and feel the emotion, that the audience will too. A huge challenge.
And you guys took this to Comic-Con, and so far the reaction's been great. I hear it's about 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. So you guys looking forward to showing it to the Midnight Madness crowd tonight? They're usually pretty enthusiastic.
Yeah, I am actually. I think it's really gonna go off.
One of the things that's interesting about the movie is that it feels very contained, right? Which is kind of an interesting way of sidestepping the whole taking off the mask thing too. Not really time to, right?
Yeah.
Is it kind of seen as part of a larger series, you know, maybe?
We have our fingers crossed, but we're also feeling like, at least I can speak for myself, I'm really happy with how this film turned out, and it's great to watch it kind of take on a life of its own, and it feels too early to be putting much energy into thinking about sequels and franchises, But that being said, I love this character. I think she's my favorite character I've ever played, and it would be an absolute dream come true to revisit her. So,
yeah, I feel the same. I mean, we're at the point where we're handing this film off to an audience, and if they have as much fun watching it as we had making it, then I'd love to come back and make more.
Well, so far they seem to be.
They do.
Olivia, I wanted to ask you, seeing as how this was kind of one of your first action movies, something you want to continue with after this, or?
It might be less the genre itself than it is this character, this girl, Anderson. I would play her in any genre of film. I mean, if they made like an Anderson strolls through the park movie, I would be the friend want to play that part still.
Not an ordinary walk.
Yeah, I kind of, in terms of action heroines, I feel like I've kind of hit the jackpot with that.
When you guys were shooting in Cape Town, right? Was there a lot of blue screen, a lot of green screen involved? Did you see kind of the world that you were in the middle of?
Yeah, I mean, there was a little bit of that, but not too much. They actually we shot in the brand new Cape Town Film Studios, and we took over the whole studio, and a lot of the sets that you see in the movie actually were built, but obviously there are elements that weren't there on the day, and they're extraordinary. And this is a really visual film, and if you're going to see it, you should check it out in 3D, because it's mind-blowing.
So, Alex, so let me ask you, you started off as a writer, wrote one of my favorite books, The Beach.
Thank you.
Then you went and started some screenwriting with 28 Days Later, and now you're getting to Judge Dredd. I just wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about that evolution.
It's just like the way it worked out.
Sure.
I do know that people kind of differentiate between novel writing and screenwriting.
Yeah.
I don't. I think they're basically the same. I mean, one ends up being very collaborative and the other essentially isn't. But apart from that, the compulsions are absolutely identical when you begin in the same place, which is a blank page and all that stuff, Yeah. You've got to come up with characters and themes and why the characters are doing what they're doing and why you're obsessed with telling this particular story. It's the same deal, really.
I'm sure you had an awareness of the character before getting onto Judge Dredd, but was it something that you had grown up with?
Yeah. I started reading Dredd when I was about 10.
2000 AD, right?
Yeah. British comics historically were weekly, and they were anthology. So there might be 7 or 8 different stories in each one. And 2000 AD has sort of precursors to an extent. There was a comic called Eagle, with a guy called Dan Dare. But really, 2000 AD just came out of nowhere. And if you were 10 years old in 1980 or 1979 and this thing arrived, it was mind-blowing.
Dark, kind of like punk rock of comics, right? A little bit?
I think you could easily make a case to say that punk and 2000 AD are related, because Dredd is, apart from the fact that there's a lot of aggression within it, it's basically subversive. It's taking the piss.
Yeah, sure.
I think it's got a punk sensibility within it. I liked it. I was completely captivated, really, from the first moment I saw it, and it stayed that way. And there's another interesting thing that they did with Dredd, which is he ages in real time.
He's in his 60s, right? Yeah.
Precisely. But it does something strange to the experience of reading a character. If I'm 42 now, and I started reading him when I was 10. So you kind of grow up with this guy.
This Dredd is totally different than the other Judge Dredd, of course, the Stallone version. It probably in the same way that Batman Begins is different from Joel Schumacher's Batman movies, right?
Yeah, sure.
And I wanted to know, how important was it for you to get some of the social commentary that was in the original 2000 ADs, which were kind of, I guess, a reaction to Thatcher-era England back into the film, which could be taken as a reaction to what's going on now?
Yeah, sure. The approach I took to Dredd specifically with regard to that was that it was implicit, that the satire was implicit. If you have a fascist state, the hero is a fascist cop, there's a built-in satire in that. You don't really need to do anything else. But if we ever got a chance to develop this character further, there's a lot you could do to further explore that. I think one of the most interesting ideas in Dredd, I mean, he's an anti-hero.
Yeah.
But there's a really great storyline built into it, which is that you get these pro-democracy terrorists, and they're terrorists. They're not messing around. They'll kill people, they'll blow stuff up, and they're terrorists as you and I know them, as it were. But they're pro-democracy, and the guy who's trying to stop them is Dredd. Now,
Who's the hero? Who's the villain?
Yeah, you don't need to satirize that, do you? It's all embedded within that idea. So I think I tried to take the approach of just having total confidence in what was already built into the story and not really signpost it in the way that you could with this kind of thing.
I mean, and while it works as a genre film, also, you know, you've got the action, you've got the 3D, you've got all that, but also it kind of doesn't underestimate the audience at all, right? It kind of assumes that the audience is, you know, quick enough to, is you know, invested enough in the story to kind of go for something like that, you know, the gray area a little bit.
I hope it's got something kind of subversive in it as well. I
Sure.
mean, at the heart of this film is a drug.
Yeah.
And the message about that drug is complicated. It's not really a just say no to this drug film. The drug itself is captivating, kind of enticing. It's overtly beautiful. I read someone saying at some point, what's so bad about this drug? Why is DREDD trying to stop people from taking it? And the drug is presented really as an escape from a really terrible world in which these people live. And you might say, yeah, not surprised they want an escape. Who wouldn't from a place like that? And that's using the drug a bit like DREDD as an anti-hero.
Yeah.
Like, what position is the film taking on that drug? What position is the film taking on DREDD?
DREDD, you know, to be faithful to the comics, keeping his mask on for most of the movie, and having somebody like Karl Urban, who's great, but it's a different kind of vibe than Stallone, I guess, who kind of,
Sure.
you know, I think was such an icon at the time. They kind of overpowered the role, and it became almost a spoof of itself.
Well, you knew what he looked like under the helmet,
Yeah.
anyway, didn't you? I mean, the thing about the helmet was none of us ever really considered taking it off.
Sure.
If you grew up reading that comic, his helmet's always been on. It's just like a given. It never seemed very complicated. That aside, Karl, if we'd said take the helmet off, would have just gone, no, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
So that would have been the end of that conversation. And Karl aside, the guys who licensed the rights to us put in the contract he can't take his helmet.
Oh, really?
So there was like an
Protecting
enormous
his character,
tsunami of pressure,
Sure.
which I would have been part of, saying keep the helmet on. It does create a problem, I suspect, at a certain point. If you keep telling this story, do you reach a point where you're thinking, why don't you just take your helmet off?
Sure. But it's a contained story, though.
I think that's the trick, is you never put the guy in a position where the helmet should be off. If he's in the bath, you'll be thinking, why are you wearing that helmet? But if he's in a gunfight, you're thinking, smart move. So.